on this discussion of family roles, we decided to tackle this role and the holiday roles on the same day because we thought they would both be hard to talk about. And so we've also been enjoying mimosas as we do this.
I like that you preface it, but I think that's important for the listeners to know. So if you hear us pouring additional glasses, this has been a very touchy, close to the vest type of subject. So family roles. So touched a little bit on it in the last episode when we talked about surviving the family during the holidays. But why do we feel that discussing roles in particular is so important?
I think people may have an inkling as to what the roles may be, but having that understanding, and here's the thing, there's different roles based on the kind of family that you have. So there's going to be, for instance, there's going to be families that are enmeshed, and there's no roles there really, because everything is just, there's a lack of boundaries, is basically what it is. And then in families dealing with any kind of addiction, then you get into these roles that people fall into, and they only emerge if you're dealing with some sort of addiction in the family.
Well, you mentioned something in the previous episode, which is actually something I made note of. When we walk through that door of our family abode, what happens? We revert back to whatever it is, like your 13-year-old self, whatever it is, whatever your role is in that family, you immediately, as soon as you step through that gate, boom.
Yeah, it's not even you picking it up. It is, oh, you're walking through, here is your cloak. Boop.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I didn't really understand this until Vince, my husband, pointed it out. He's like, you change around your family. And it happens without it. I didn't even notice it. But once he brought that to my attention, I started noticing the things I was doing. I was overextending myself beyond what I normally would. I was saying yes to things I didn't want to say yes to. Again, we'll get more into about what each of those family roles are, but he was right. I was reverting back to the Melissa that my family has come to know.
And expect.
Exactly. That's the thing is,
expectations. You rear your ugly head again.
I know. And so it's interesting because, and this is the part I was telling you about, because you're like, oh, well, we'll talk about family roles and like the 6 dysfunctional family roles. And I was like, no, boo-boo. I found new research that I think is very, very interesting.
All right, lay it on me.
So, oftentimes, like I say this to Vince all the time, I said, I don't even know how I'm really related to these people because I'm so different from them. Do you ever experience that?
I do. And I also tend to go back and go, I guess I did get that from somebody.
But actually science shows that statement where it's like, well, I'm nothing like my parents, is actually more of a feeling than a fact. And that families profoundly affect our thoughts and our feelings and our actions. And that whether we'd like to admit this or not, that we're seeking out our family's attention, approval, and support. And so we, in reaction to that, what we're doing is we're reacting to other people's needs and their expectations. And if they get upset, we try to accommodate for that. So actually our connectedness between our family members and the functioning of within family members actually makes us interdependent upon one another. And so I came across this really cool research on family systems theory, and it was developed by psychologist Dr. Murray Bowen in the 1950s. And he says basically that a family is a system in which each member has a role to play and rules to respect. And that the roles impact what is expected of each individual. You mentioned expectations earlier. For me, for example, I was the caretaker, the mediator, problem solver, whatever it is. And based on how my family perceived me is how they interacted with me. So how family members interact is directly related to how they perceive you or your role in that family. So these roles that we live into are basically determined by relationship agreements that have been formed over time. That saying that we've mentioned in previous episodes, like you teach people how to treat you, that's 100% true. And so maintaining our role or our behavior in the family may provide some balance within the family system for a while, but it also leads to dysfunction. So I'll take my role in the family as caretaker, for example. So when my parents divorced, my mom was distraught. My dad was like all up in the business of his new woman, and I was left to take care of my siblings. And as the caretaker, I was giving some reprieve to my mom, who was, like I mentioned, was distraught. And so for a short period of time, that brought balance and peace within the family because I was fulfilling a role that needed to be filled, or so I thought. However, as time grew on, I became resentful and I began to distance myself from that family because that role no longer served me. And so what Dr. Bowen is saying, that patterns and behaviors will continue to operate that way until it's challenged. And in a previous episode, I mentioned how one Christmas I went above and beyond, cooked and cleaned for the holidays, and none of the effort that I was putting in was being reciprocated. And this is after years of this type of behavior that I just grew resentful, and I was like, fuck this, like I'm done. And so what resulted of that is I started to change my behavior. And by changing your role in the family, that doesn't just impact you. The immediate impact might be me. I might be starting to establish boundaries, but what happens is it sends ripples throughout the entire family because now you're changing the family dynamics, and how people feel and act about that can range.
And people will try to keep you in that role, right? They will try very hard because that's what they've known.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I'd shared that in a previous episode where, I was trying to change the family dynamics. I was starting to establish healthy boundaries for myself, but it wasn't easy. And I had to learn how to craft how to say no. I sent, a draft text to like 5 different people before I sent it to my sibling, and it wasn't well received, but that's okay. But understanding that that's a normal part of the process when you're starting to change that role within the family, just know that that's not going to just be felt by you. It's going to be felt by everyone.
Right. And for our listeners, that caretaker of the family role, right? Like it sounds intuitive, but it's also known as the family hero in psychology. That inside the family, this person they're a good kid. They're a high achiever. They follow all the rules. They seek approval. They're very responsible. They're basically the person in the family that you go to when shit hits the fan. They're the person that's going to take on that mantle of kind of being the parent in a way.
Well, and I was actually doing research, just real quick to interject, is oftentimes when a person grows up in a traumatic household and are forced to become an adult quicker than they need to, what do they call it? It's like a parentified child. Thank you. Parentified child, you are often the caretaker because the caretaker is a parentified child.
Right. And so what that does, and we've talked about that in an earlier episode too, where you have the different developmental changes, right? The natural changes that you would make in life. And so if you have to skip adolescence and you have to skip some of these steps because you have to, provide food for the family, you have to physically make the food, or you have to do other things that a caretaker is supposed to do, that's something that's going to come out in the family. But in addition to the family hero, which I very much identify with being the family hero, even this past week, I got a phone call from one of my siblings. Like, I don't know who to talk to. I don't know what's going on here, but one of our cousins needs some help. It turned out to be like this whole other drama, big scam. And I'm sitting there, I was like, I can't fulfill this role for you right now because I have a deposition in 20 minutes. Give me a number. I'll make one phone call. That's it. Give me the name. I looked up the name and the number. The name was associated to a Mexican drug cartel. And I was like, fuck this, I'm out. I don't even know if that was a real name or not, but did not matter.
I've watched Narco, Bobo. You need to be careful.
Well, that's why I was like, I'm out. I'm out. I don't care what this is. I am out. And if they really need some help, some other things, call mom. Like, that's probably who you needed to call to begin with anyways. But no, he called me because that is one of the roles that I play, right? So it's you got the family hero / caretaker of the family, right? That's who you're going to have. Now, keep in mind, these roles will usually only come out in some sort of addiction, dependency type situation.
But I think every family member has some, or not every family member, every family has some sort of dysfunction. I mean, there might be family members or families that have more extra teaspoon or two of dysfunction, but every family has dysfunction. So I think that these roles still apply.
I think no family is perfect,
Absolutely.
right? You're not going to have that. But I do think that there are healthy families, and I've observed healthy families, and then there are families with a lot of dysfunction.
No, I appreciate you saying that. And I think the reason is I have not seen a healthy family dynamic. And so for me, I have no frame of reference for that.
So I actually looked up healthy families as part of the research for this one, because I was like, well, what does a healthy family look like if we've got all these other family roles? So I'll get to those in a little bit, but I do want to finish going through these for our listeners, because I do think that it's important, because you may see this in yourself, or you may see it in a partner, of where when they revert back, they may revert back to some of these roles that they don't necessarily have in your family. Because here's the thing, your family role changes depending on which family you're in. So if you're going back to your nuclear family with your parents, you're going to have one role versus the role that you have
with your partner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have that in different settings. But I think even in group families, right? Like in your friends, like that's the family that you choose. Some of these roles kind of come out in there too, right? Like you're not necessarily all going to be fully functional, but I do think that these are good things for people to know. So that the other roles on here are, you have the victim. The victim is basically, they're the chemically dependent person. That's what they call them. This person is going to be blaming everybody else. There's going to be a lot of manipulation, aggression, self-pity. They're going to be possibly charming, have a lot of rigid values. That's what they're going to show on the outside. But on the inside, they're full of shame, guilt, fear, pain, and hurt.
Well, the research that I did, again, addiction did come up as one of them. But to me, it also kind of reminded me of the other role, which maybe is one and the same, or there's a lot of overlap between the two, which is the scapegoat. And
the scapegoat is a separate role.
See, I saw a lot of parallel between the two.
There's a lot of parallels.
But just because you are a scapegoat doesn't necessarily mean you're an addict.
Right. So the scapegoat is the problem child. So the scapegoat is
often known as like the black sheep of the family.
Exactly. So they're on the outside, they're going to be hostile, they're going to be defiant, rule breaking, they're constantly in trouble. On the inside, they're filled with rejection, hurt, guilt, jealousy, and anger. And actually, why you saw those parallels is because what the scapegoat will do sometimes mirrors what the victim is doing in order to take away attention from the victim and take away attention from this big problem that's happening over here. They can actually do that. They may not know consciously that they're doing that, but that is something that's going on. So there's actually a lot of similarities between those two roles.
Well, and I was also in my research, like the scapegoat has learned very quickly and at a very young age that bad attention is better than no attention. And so they'll act out. And it makes me sad because when I was reading these roles, I'm looking at my siblings because I'm one of 4 children. And so I'm like, that is me, that is so-and-so, that is so-and-so. And the person who comes to mind, and all my siblings would agree who the scapegoat in the family is, made me sad because I learned that scapegoats are often very aware of their role in the family and may feel rejected, unlovable, and isolated. Mm-hmm. And you see, and maybe we talk about this later, but you see how these roles play out in the decisions we make in life, the partners that we choose, maybe even some of the professions that we go into to kind of help heal or deter some of the feelings that we felt as children. Mm-hmm. So I just found that to be interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, no, the scapegoat, everybody knows who the scapegoat is in the family.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, everybody knows who everybody else is in the family too. And so you're going to know who the scapegoat is. And what I found interesting on the scapegoat aspect was that aspect of, hey, I'm going to deflect attention away from the victim. And this is the way to do it, is by acting out. Because otherwise everybody's so focused on the person who has the main problems, right? Then from there, you've got the lost child. This is the forgotten child. On the outside, they're very shy, they're quiet, they live a solitary life, they're maybe mediocre, they attach to things rather than people. But on the inside, there's a lot of rejection, hurt, and anxiety. And I can imagine so, because I definitely feel like I know who the lost child is in my family. And that has to do with just, well, I'm going to not be doing anything to call attention to myself. Now, this next role I think is really an interesting one too, is the chief enabler, because in my family, I feel like I know who the chief enabler is, but I don't think they realize that that's what they are. And that's not for me to point out to them. I think that's for them to figure out on their own. But the chief enabler is the closest emotionally to the victim or the protector of the family. And so on the outside, they're going to be self-righteous. They're going to be super responsible, sarcastic, passive. They're also going to manifest like physical symptoms or of being physically sick. They're going to be the enabler, but on the inside, there's a lot of anger, there's low self-esteem, they're hurt, and then there's guilt. And then the final role that comes out is going to be the mascot. This is going to be the family clown. On the outside, they're going to be really immature, fragile, they're going to be hyperactive, distracted all the time. On the inside, there's going to be a lot of fear, anxiety, and insecurity.
Interesting. And there was actually another one that I came across, which I think when I mentioned before we started recording, like I never heard that, which was the golden child, which if my siblings are listening, they know exactly who we're talking about. But again, it's not the child's fault, but it's basically the parent or the caregiver will often favor the golden child and who represents all that the parents love within themselves. So, and it can create animosity between siblings. And I know that we're talking about these roles, and I know that.
How do you think the golden child is different from the family hero? Because I feel like those are the same.
I don't, because I think the family hero, because I exhibited a lot of the hero tendencies where it's like I would come in and I would come up with like a problem to save the day, and I would help, whether it was financially giving family members money because they needed books or tuition or whatever. So I was there to fill that need, but I definitely was not the golden child.
In your view, the golden child does no wrong. They're like
does no wrong, doesn't have any accountability, doesn't take fault for anything, but that creates a lot of resentment between that particular individual and other members of the family. But it was interesting is like as you were talking or going over these roles in the family, immediately I was only thinking about my siblings, but that also pertains to your parents too.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I hadn't really thought about how my parents' roles play into that.
Mm-hmm.
How interesting. So I have a question, which is like, what is the benefit of knowing what role or you or others play in the family?
I think it's an awareness issue, right? And so knowing yourself and kind of knowing where you're at. Because here's the thing, just because you play that role in the family doesn't mean you need to stay in that role.
Mm-hmm.
You have the ability to get out of that. And, if we're talking about being agents of change, this is an area of your life that you can change if you want to. Now, you will get pushback because people don't want you to get out of that role, but it is something that if you know where you're at, and if you know that you revert back to, say, being the lost child when you're at a family event, or you revert back to being the class clown or the family clown, like you may not even like doing those things. And as you pointed out, Vince pointed out to you, like, hey, you change when you're around your family.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Matt's quite pointed that out to me as I change, but there's definitely a difference of where I'm at. And I've noticed it in him. And he comes from actually a pretty healthy family. I hadn't noticed really any dysfunction in them. And, they've got their own things, right? That everybody does. But he always kind of reverts back to being extra playful during that time period. And even when his parents are around, he becomes, he falls all over himself to like do all these things for them. He does that for me as well, but it's just like almost like a different level.
Oh yeah.
Where I see, okay, you kind of revert back a little bit, but not anything that I'm upset about later.
Well, you mentioned your desire to change. Okay, you see that, okay, Melissa, you are the caregiver, but I've also been the hero, right? So you talk about this desire to change, but there's so many things at play here. So yeah, I might be sick and tired of being the caretaker. Like, I want people just to be able to handle their shit. I don't want this extra responsibility. However, there's also a part of my ego is like, I like the feeling of being needed.
If it serves you, that's fine.
But it doesn't necessarily serve me. I think that, there's so many different components that are at play that you have to, okay, so there's this need to like feed my ego. I want to feel wanted. I need to feel needed. but I'm also leaving each family function exceptionally drained because it's not filling me. So it's like, how do you sift through, is it time to change? And then like, what role do I go into? What's a healthy role within a family?
Well, in healthy families, they're going to have respectful boundaries. They're going to have respect for one another. They're going to not betray each other's trust. So if you share something with one family member, they're not going to go blabbing it to somebody else. They're going to be respectful. I mean, like, that's basically what it comes down to. And another key part of a healthy family is that individuation is actually going to be a thing. And so this is something that Carl Jung came up with, which is basically when you have to become an individual. And some families are not going to let you be an individual. You need to be a part of that unit. And so I feel like this is a transformation that I've been through recently, of just really it's not only just becoming an individual, but it's becoming an individual and accepting all of your pieces and having full integration of your full self. Everything's together. And so once you reach all of that, you've now realized your full self, not necessarily your full potential, but your full self. And so this individualization process is something that some families are going to be like, not in our family. Oh yeah, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to be an individual. And you're not allowed to not like sports. And maybe you're super inept at sports. But in this family, no, we like sports. You are not allowed to do that. You have to be part of this unit. And so those are slightly different things. And then I also came across enmeshed families. They have zero boundaries whatsoever. That's where, I know you're giving me these looks right now, because when I was looking at enmeshed families, I thought, well, who do I know who has an enmeshed family?
You need to shut your mouth right now. I'm just kidding.
But in an enmeshed family, you're looking at complete lack of boundaries.
Oh, yeah.
Parents treating their kids like friends or
partners,
or partners, exactly. And just everything is out in the open. But this is one of those things that even one of our guests had talked about, and I believe it was Marisa Lupo. She talks about just everything being within the family, right? And so when you have this enmeshed family, they don't let you go through this process either, because everything needs to be together.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, and I'm definitely from an enmeshed family, because every decision I make is almost like, well, that's a reflection of me, like me speaking about like my parents, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and so, yeah, it was interesting. But as you're talking about like a healthy family, I'm just kind of like laughing in my head a little bit, because I'm like, this is like a fairy tale. Like I mean, because you can only control you. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, based on the roles that we've just gone over, there's a lot of dysfunction in my family, and I'm sure yours, right? But I mean, so...
But with the enmeshed family in particular, that is a learned trait. And so that goes through just families of, this is how it's done.
But when you have a large family, though, the impact that I have on the family is going to be minimal, because it's only me that's changing.
Well, I mean, this is kind of where we get into the next generation, right? Like, you might be able to help your nibblings with, hey, there are some things here. And I think you've kind of done that already, because there are times where you've shared with me where a parent is seeking information on one of your siblings, and you have purposefully said, I'm not sharing that with you. If you want to have a relationship with them, go do that.
Go ask them yourself.
Exactly. And so what you're doing there is you're establishing a boundary of, hey, I respect my relationship with my sibling and what they've told me, that I'm not going to share that with you. And I recently took a lesson from your book, and I did that with my mom. She was asking questions about one of my brothers. She's like, have you seen him? Have you done this and that? I was like, yeah. And I kept it very basic, and I did not give her any information about what was actually going on in his life, because again, that's not my relationship. I'm not going to be that triangle in that relationship. I refuse to be in triangulated situations if I can avoid it as much as I can. And that's one of those things, being that relationship and being that filter of information. No, I'm not going to do that. If you want to have a relationship with them, you guys figure out your own shit, and then you can have a relationship.
I feel like this is like the things that we're talking about here, moving from dysfunction to healthy, takes time. And because I don't see my family very often, I mean, this could be a transformation that takes years to do, because I don't have that opportunity to necessarily practice establishing healthy boundaries with my siblings, because I maybe talk to them a couple times a year, or I see them, at Christmas every few years, or whatever it is. But I just, looking at it, you can only control you.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can, like you mentioned, establish those boundaries where, there's trust and you're respectful, that's all you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Others might still continue to play the role that they've grown so comfortable in, but that doesn't mean you have to.
Right. You don't have to continue to play that role. And so for myself, being the family hero, caretaker of the family, whatever when you want to call it, being in that role, I have set up boundaries where I will not rescue you. I want to see what you did beforehand, and I do the same thing with my team. It's like, show me your work, show me what you did beforehand, and then I can see if I can help. But at the end of the day, you need to have a plan as well. I'm here to help. I want to make sure that I can help. I've put myself in a position where I can, both financially and emotionally, but I should not be your first call. I should be probably your last call.
It's interesting. So we talk about, okay, so if I want to change my role in the family, how do I do so? I did find or come up with like 4 steps, many of which we've talked about. Number 1 is identify the changes you wish to make, right? There might be some pull. It might not even be clear cut. Like I mentioned, like I want to feel needed, but I also find the role of caretaker or hero exhausting, right? So really getting clear as to what changes you'd like to make. Number 2, and this one was really interesting, is watch for familiar clues or triggers. And like I mentioned, some of these triggers or cues we may not even be aware of because, I didn't even know that I was changing until my husband pointed it out. But ask yourself, if I were in a different environment, how would I behave and react in this situation? Number 3 is remembering that change takes time. And we just talked about that, especially if you don't interact with your family members often, this could take months or years to do. And number 4 is the only person we can compel to change is ourselves. So not everyone's going to like the changes that you're implementing for yourself, but who cares? As long as you're happy and it serves you best, continue with that.
And I think here's the thing. People who are going to tell you things like, you changed, man, you're not the same, all these things, they're mad at you because you're no longer fitting their narrative and you're no longer fitting the role that they want you to have. And here's the thing, you're not living life for them. You're living it for you. So who gives a fuck what they think? It takes time to have your level of fucks go down as far as mine has gone down, but it is possible for you to do that and just really know that you're living your life for you. You're not living for them. You're not, if they didn't fulfill dreams that they wanted to have, that's on them. And they have the ability to still pursue things that they want to do. If they've chosen not to do those things, those are choices. They have to own their choices, just like you have to own your choices of what you decide to do and what roles you decide to keep in your life.
When you were just talking about how others might perceive certain changes you've made, I've been through that. And I've had siblings use different tactics. It's funny because I didn't see them as tactics, but play to my emotional part, whether it's guilt or whatever. And oftentimes I would bend because I'm like, oh God, now they're going to be put out or whatever. And I think just sticking to your guns, like if you're starting to establish new boundaries, it's uncomfortable for you just like it's uncomfortable for them. And I think giving yourself permission to feel uncomfortable, but to be steadfast. Steadfast. And if you've already told a person no, that you're not going to do something, or you've established a new boundary, stick to it.
Yeah.
It's going to be super uncomfortable and difficult at first, but I promise you it gets easier the more and more you do it. And over time, those family members will start to understand, okay, Melissa's not going to do X, Y, and Z. And so they no longer ask me for X, Y, and Z. And in the end, I'm happier, and they've grown to a new custom to where, yeah, they might be angry or upset at first, but again, that's something they're projecting on you. That has nothing to do with you. Like you said, you're no longer fulfilling what it is that they want to. It's a selfish act.
Right.
Right? And go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that once you identify what your boundaries are, a good way of knowing that you've crossed your own boundaries is the feeling of resentment. Resentment is something that my counselor keeps going back to. She's like, when you feel resentful, it's not because of something somebody else did. It's because of violation that you did to yourself. You violated one of your own boundaries in doing something. And so when that feeling pops up, now that's what I think about. It's like, okay, Why am I resentful here? It's because I didn't say no. It's because I agreed to do something I wasn't really enjoying. It didn't fit my 90% rule, whatever that is. So that's a way for you to monitor that. Because here's the thing, boundaries, we're going to let them slip. We're going to go back to things. We're going to say yes. We're going to, say yes in a moment of weakness or bend because of some emotional thing. And that's going to remind you, that feeling of resentment is going to remind you, why is this important for you? And here's the thing, if you find yourself in resentment over and over again, you can even change your boundaries.
Oh, absolutely. Nothing is set in stone, right? You can always adapt, and then that's the beauty of it.
That's the whole thing. You can adapt no matter what you're doing. You can adapt from these roles. You can keep these roles. You can move out in your nuclear family. You might serve one role. In your larger family, you might have another role. In your partnership, in your own family that you build for yourself, you'll have a different role. And it's up to you to decide, does this serve me or not? And how much of this do I want to continue to take on? We want to hear from you. What role do you play in your family? Is it one you want to change? Join the discussion in our private Facebook community. We want to thank our producer and music director, Ron Johnson. This has been an Astronomicus DMR production. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late and you're right on time.